Ailsa and Weshath Hale. Welcome back to the Frithstead Fireside, a Setish podcast. I'm Folcweard, and this is episode 10, the Frith model, recorded live. So, if you have been walking this path with us, you know that our work has always been, about more than just simply discussing ideas, right? Together, as we've been progressing through these episodes, we've been building a framework for understanding ourselves and fulfilling that sacred endowment that's entrusted to us by the gods and our ancestors, and facing the world and becoming the people that we're meant to be. We've explored how to find clarity in a world that's filled with noise and confusion, and we've examined how Orlog establishes the inherited pattern into which we're born, and how Weird unfolds through the choices by which we answer that inheritance. We've looked at the human soul as the sacred endowment bestowed by the gods. That it's a living structure of gifts entrusted to our stewardship, and each requires discipline and cultivation and faithful care. With this episode, I want to get real. And that's not saying that I haven't been real before, but how should I word this? When I say I want to get real, I'm going to get personal. I'm going to go deep into those things that we just don't talk about. But it's things that we should. It's things that we may not think about, but we should. And so really, I want to take everything that we've been covering and bring it home, get real with y'all, and it's just me and you sitting here looking for and delving into the truth. All right, we're gonna look at the ugly truth and reject the beautiful lie. So let's bring this together into what I call the Frith model. Now, the Frith model is not simply a philosophy that we look up to or we admire. It's practical framework for applying the wisdom of our ancestors to the struggles of our modern life. Because knowledge without action is incomplete. And the purpose of this work is faithful transformation, but transformation through responsibility, so that the order that's established by the gods may be more fully reflected in our own lives. It's learning how to govern your own mind and cultivate your character, bring order to your actions, and become the person that you're capable of becoming. Now, the Frith model unfolds in stages. You have the awakening, and that's learning to step back from automatic reactions so that our hugger, our mind, may proceed clearly and better govern our thoughts, control our emotions and habits according to wisdom rather than impulse. Before anything can be restored, it has to be seen clearly. And then we have what I call the house clearing. And that's examining the burdens that we carry and identifying the habits, the judgments, the false conclusions that no longer serve right order, and therefore it no longer serves us, and restoring Frith within that inner household. And then there's the reforging, restoring the enduring character intended by the gods in place of what disorder has corrupted. It's the work of cultivating beliefs grounded in truth and developing disciplined habits. And learning how to align our thoughts, words, and actions with the person that we're striving to become. So this is not an abstract philosophy. It is a discipline for living, because the greatest battles that most people face are not fought in the world around them, but they're fought within. And so how do we find ourselves reacting instead of choosing? Something happens, okay? An emotion rises. And before we understand what's taking place, we're already responding from the old patterns. A word is spoken, a memory is stirred, there's a fear that awakens, and frustration just takes hold and grows. And then suddenly we are no longer acting from wisdom, but we're acting from the old disorder that has not yet been brought back into right order. See, many people believe that they're responding only to the moment before them, what's in front of their eyes, the situation as it's happening. But in truth, they're often responding through patterns that have long been woven into their weird. And more often, they're responding to those echoes of the past, to experiences, fears, assumptions, and habits that continue to shape their lives. The Frith model begins by cultivating disciplined awareness, because no lasting Frith can be established where disorder is unseen. Its first lesson is simple. Become the observer. Become the faithful steward of your Huger. Now, observation here, okay, it's neither weakness nor passivity. It is the first act of mastery, and honest perception is the first act of self-governance. When you learn to step back and witness your own thoughts and emotions and reactions, then you create space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. And that space is where freedom begins. And within that space, disciplined judgment becomes possible. Everything that follows in the Frith model grows from that first act of awareness. So today, we begin by redefining how we see ourselves, because we're not broken machines in need of quick repairs, but we're living beings entrusted with the inner household of the Huger, our spirit, our character, these inherited gifts that make up who we are. And each requires faithful stewardship throughout life. And like any homestead, the soul requires stewardship, because like a neglected roof leaks, a neglected wall will weaken, and a neglected field will become overgrown. The same is true of the self. Yet what has fallen from right order, it may, through faithful discipline, be restored to Frith. And that is the work before us. So the Frith model. Now, the word Frith is often translated just simply as peace. But really that translation is too small. Because Frith is not merely the absence of conflict, but it's the presence of right order and like an unspoken agreement that there is not only peace, but trust and loyalty and security, safety, all of these things. And it's something that is actively and faithfully maintained through honor. So it's through living honorably that all of that is tended to and maintenance to, right? So, Frith is the condition in which each part stands in its proper relationship to the gods, the ancestors, the folk, and every other part of creation, right? Now there's different layers of like circles of Frith, if you will. So Frith in and of itself doesn't always apply to everything and everyone, but in the context of having a proper relationship, that's what I'm talking about. Like, for instance, within the family, Frith is loyalty, it's mutual obligation, and it's trust. Within the community, it's justice, it's responsibility to, act right and obey the law and cooperate with others. And with the individual, it's the harmony of thought, emotion, spirit, and action. And disorder is every departure from that sacred order. When our beliefs no longer reflect reality, disorder enters, right? When our emotions rule our judgment, disorder enters. When our actions contradict our principles, again, disorder enters. And left unattended, that disorder spreads outward, from the individual to the household, from the household to the clan, from the clan to the folk. And ultimately it weakens those the covenantal bonds that unite them, before the gods. And our ancestors understood this because they sought to live within the right order of the cosmos. Before a hall could become a place of hospitality, it first had to be built upon a strong foundation. Before a folk could flourish, each member had to fulfill their responsibilities. Order was never accidental. It was cultivated through discipline and wisdom and continual faithful action. The same principle governs our inner life. Now, the Frith model begins with the understanding that every human being possesses what I like to call an inner household. Okay? And within that household reside our memories, beliefs, emotions, habits, convictions, dreams, and aspirations. And like any household, it requires continual care. You see, neglect invites disorder, because every gift abandoned eventually will depart from its proper order. And faithful stewardship restores it back toward Frith. And this is why the Frith model is a discipline rather than just merely a philosophy. Its purpose is not merely to explain why we struggle, but to provide a practical path toward restoring right order within ourselves. And it calls us to become faithful stewards of the endowment entrusted to us rather than passive spectators of our own lives. Now, the work unfolds in three movements. First comes the awakening, and we learn to perceive ourselves through honesty and through disciplined hugger. We stop drifting through life under the control of unconscious habits, and we begin to see our thoughts and our emotions and our reactions with clarity. Then second comes the house clearing. Now, awareness reveals where disorder has taken root. We examine the burdens we carry and the wounds that continue shaping our responses and the beliefs that no longer serve the person we are striving to become. We don't deny the past, but we don't remain imprisoned by it. We understand it so that we may place it in its proper order, because everything goes back to order. And third comes the reforging. So removing disorder is only half of the work, because the empty spaces must be rebuilt with truth and with discipline and honorable habits. We cultivate beliefs that are grounded in reality, and we practice virtues through repeated action. And we bring our thoughts and our words and our deeds into alignment. And these stages are not isolated events, but they form a continuous cycle. Now, throughout life, we're going to encounter challenges. We're going to encounter new responsibilities that pop up and add to the old. But there's also going to be new opportunities for growth. And whenever disorder appears, we return to that same path. We awaken, clear, and reforge. And this is the work of restoring Frith. And it is not the pursuit of perfection. And I stress that it is not the pursuit of perfection, but it is just the pursuit of right order. It is the pursuit of rejecting chaos and disorder in order to have and maintain and hold on to and embody, discipline and structure and right order. Now, the person who walks this path doesn't become someone who never experiences hardship. No, because, hardship remains part of life. And that's just like winter remains part of the turning of the year. When, what changes is not that hardships will come, but what changes is the person. Now, instead of reacting blindly, they respond with intention. Instead of being governed by fear, they're guided by wisdom and strength and courage. And instead of allowing old wounds to dictate the present, they choose actions that reflect truth, honor, and responsibility. This is the aim of the Frith monk. It's not to escape life, and it's not to avoid suffering, but to become the kind of person who can meet both with a steadfastness, with steadiness. Because the greatest victories are first won within ourselves before they are ever won over the world around us. And every lasting victory begins with the same question. Am I willing to see myself clearly? Am I willing to see myself truthfully? And that question marks the beginning of the first stage. It is the beginning of the awakening, because every transformation begins with awareness. But before we can restore order, we must first recognize where disorder exists and see the pattern that sustains it. And this is the work of the awakening. This is the moment we stop living entirely by reaction and begin living with intention. For many people, life feels as though it just simply happens to them. Circumstances will change, emotions will rise, challenges appear, and they're carried wherever the strongest current takes them. A harsh word can ruin the day. A disappointment will turn into despair. An old memory will awaken, and suddenly the past begins directing and controlling the present. But the problem is not emotion itself. Emotion is part of being human. It's normal, it's natural to feel things, even the negative things. But properly understood, it can serve a purpose. It alerts us to what matters. It draws our attention to what requires examination and reminds us that we are living beings rather than machines. And the danger comes when emotion becomes our master instead of our messenger. The hugger, the reasoning and perceiving faculty that's within the greater architecture of our soul, if you will. The hugger is the part that learns to observe. And it is the faculty that's capable of stepping back from immediate reaction to examine thought and emotion and choosing its response according to wisdom rather than impulse. This disciplined capacity of the hugger is what I call the observer within. And it's not a separate part of ourselves, but it's the Huger exercising its proper role in witnessing our inner experience without immediately becoming governed by it. Now, this is not detachment from life. It's engagement with life through clarity rather than impulse. Now, consider the difference between these two statements, okay? I am angry versus anger is arising within me. Now, the words are similar, but the understanding is different. So in the first statement, your identity has become fused with the emotion. Anger possesses you. What are you saying? I am what? I am angry. So anger is me. And it has that sense of claiming that as an identity, But in the second, anger is arising within me. You recognize that anger is an experience that you are having. It's real, but it's not your identity. It's something that you can observe, you can examine it, and you can ultimately choose how to respond to it. And the same is true for fear. Instead of saying, I'm afraid, we learn to recognize, and we say, fear is present, or fear is here, And instead of saying something like, I'm a failure, we stop and we recognize, and we say, I'm experiencing thoughts of failure. Okay, how about this one? Instead of saying, this situation has stolen my peace, we might ask, why is my mind interpreting this as a threat? Why is my mind seeing this situation as threatening? So it's these small shifts that create something invaluable. It creates space between the event and the response, between the feeling and the action. Within that space lies a freedom, and we need to recognize that space in between. Now, most people believe that they are just responding to the present moment, but really they're responding to meanings that they have attached to the present moment. Two people, can experience that same hardship, but they can emerge with entirely different conclusions. One sees an obstacle to overcome, but another sees proof that they're incapable. But the event is the same, but they see it differently, and the interpretation is different. And this is why awareness is so powerful, because the moment we observe our thoughts, instead of automatically believing them, we begin to reclaim authority over our own minds. And we begin asking better questions. Why did this affect me so strongly? What belief lies beneath this emotion? Is this response appropriate to what is happening now? Or is it just an echo of something that's much older? But above all, we ask whether we are acting from wisdom or are we acting from habit? And these questions definitely are not signs of weakness. They're signs of discipline. Like any exercise, it hurts. It's not comfortable, but it's that pain that is required in order to grow stronger, right? How does muscle build? When you're lifting weights, you're causing micro tears on your muscle, and that's painful. But then the healing process happens, and as those tears become healed, new muscle is grown, and the muscles become stronger for it. So again, these questions are not a sign of weakness. They're signs of discipline, and that's healthy. A person who refuses to examine themselves, they remain governed by whatever impulses happen to rise. Anger will dictate their speech. Fear will dictate their choices. Pride blinds them to correction. Old wounds will quietly determine the course of their lives. But the person who cultivates awareness, they begin to recover their mastery. They're no longer passengers. They become the helmsman. And this is why observation is the first act of mastery. See, many people mistake observation for passivity, believing that just simply noticing thoughts and emotions, that's not doing anything. But the opposite is true. See, what remains hidden quietly governs us. But what is brought into the light can be examined, and what can be examined can be ordered. You see, a person cannot repair a roof if they refuse to look at it. Anytime there's a problem, you have to look at it. You can't fix it if you don't look at it and know the truth about it. Because, like I said, you can't repair a roof if you refuse to get up on the roof and look at it. And neither can you restore the soul while refusing to look within. Now, the purpose of observation is definitely not self-condemnation, but it's honest assessment. A skilled builder doesn't become angry when he discovers a cracked beam, but he recognizes the damage, he understands its cause, and he begins the work of restoration. And the same discipline belongs to the practitioner of Frith. We're not searching for reasons to despise ourselves. That's the easy path. That's the lazy path, is to hate ourselves. And so many people hate themselves, even if they don't admit it or realize it. But you can tell when you watch people. But we're searching for places where disorder has entered the inner household. And this takes courage because it's hard. Looking inward is often more difficult than facing outward challenges. Why? Well, because it demands honesty without the excuses that we like to give so much. We always give excuses. And there comes a time when we just have to stop and say no more excuses. It's that ugly truth instead of the beautiful lie. It asks us to recognize where our own habits, assumptions, and reactions have contributed to the disorder that we experience. Yet this honesty, again, I'm going to stress this again, it must never become self-hatred nor condemnation. Its purpose is claiming responsibility. Now, our ancestors understood, that no hall remained standing through neglect. Every season, there was a time to repair things. Every winter revealed weaknesses that had to be addressed before the next storm arrived. That's how our soul is. That's how we are. Every life will accumulate burdens, and every person develops habits, and every mind will form assumptions. Some will strengthen us, yes, but others will just quietly and slowly but surely tear us down and weaken us. And we can't hide behind the pride of just thinking that we're, big and bad and tough and because it doesn't matter what you might look like on the outside. I'm talking about the inside. I'm talking about the part of you that only you know. I've talked about it. Others talk about it, about the fake it till you make it. When it comes to the stuff that I'm talking about, you can't fake it till you make it in this regard, because that's like trying to do things with willpower alone. Nobody is strong enough to just constantly, forever, willpower their way. Eventually, there will be a crack, and that crack will grow, and the dam will burst, and the damage of the flood will happen. And we don't need to allow things to build up for those things to happen, because then we might push people away. We might hurt somebody, whether it's physical or emotional, mental. Relationships can end And we don't want that. We want to build relationships. The awakening, it's the moment that we begin distinguishing between that which strengthens us and that which weakens us. It's the moment we stop drifting through life unconsciously, and we begin to govern ourselves deliberately, where we learn to take the first steps towards self-mastery. And it's not with controlling others, and it's not with trying to change the world, but it's with learning to govern the one person that's entrusted to our care, ourselves. And this is why when I wrote my book, Trunadarbok, the loyalty writings, and was discussing the concentric circles of loyalty, this everything I'm talking about, this is why the very first circle that I wrote about in that book is loyalty to the self. Not about being selfish. It's about maintaining right order, bringing healing where healing needs to take place, being the man or woman that we know that we can be, that those we love need of us, that our ancestors and our descendants expect from us. Only then are we prepared for the next stage of the journey. Because, once awareness has revealed where disorder exists, then we must decide what to do with what we have found. That work begins with what I call the house clearing. Awareness is the beginning of restoration, but awareness alone doesn't restore order. A person may recognize the disorder within their inner household and still be bound by it. They may clearly see the patterns that are shaping their life, yet continue repeating them simply because they have never learned another way. And this is why the second stage of the Frith model is the house clearing. So if the awakening teaches us to see, the house clearing teaches us to restore, right? Now, every household accumulates what no longer belongs, right? Dust gathers, tools break, rooms become cluttered, repairs are postponed until neglect slowly becomes the new normal. And our inner life is no different, because every person carries memories and beliefs and fears, disappointments, various habits that have been collected over the course of life. Now, again, some of these do strengthen us, they do, but so many others were born from seasons of hardship, and they continue shaping us long after those seasons have ended. Many of these burdens were once useful, and fear at one time may have protected us. Distrust may have prevented further injury. Withdrawal may have been preserved. It may have preserved us, during painful circumstances, right? But what helps us survive one chapter of life is not always meant to govern the chapters that follow afterward. A shield that's carried long after the battle has ended, it'll eventually become a burden. So the purpose of the house clearing is neither to deny the past nor to become trapped within it. Okay? The goal is to place the past in its proper order. Our experiences are part of our weird. They've shaped us. They've taught us. And they left their mark on us. And we honor those experiences without allowing them to become the masters of our present. Memory deserves respect. It does. But it does not deserve ultimate authority. The work begins by learning to recognize our patterns. You see, most people assume that they're responding only to life as it's happening, right? But again, as I've stated, they're responding to what the present reminds them of. A simple disagreement can awaken an old fear of rejection. That sting will become real as if it is happening, all over again with all the pain. A minor mistake can stir feelings of just like overwhelming shame, or an unexpected setback can revive a belief that the failure is inevitable. The present moment can provide the spark, and the deeper fuel, it often comes from somewhere much older. So the fuel from the past will be thrown onto that present spark to create the fire that is not needed. And for this reason, we learn to map our patterns. So rather than asking, why did I react this way? We go deeper into questions. When have I felt this before? What belief was awakened? What story am I telling myself? What part of my past has become attached to this present moment? You see, patterns reveal themselves through repetition. The circumstances, they may change. But you know what? The responses will be familiar. The names change, the places change, the people change, but that same fear returns. The same anger appears. The same conclusion is reached. When we begin noticing these reoccurring themes, we stop seeing isolated moments. And we begin seeing the structure that's beneath them. And this is one of the greatest gifts of awareness. The hidden patterns that quietly govern us. There'll be visible patterns that can be transformed. So you see that the house clearing, it also teaches us to distinguish between memory and the emotional charge. A memory is just simply the record of what happened. But that emotional charge, that's the lingering force that causes the past to continue influencing the present. And there's an important difference between remembering an event and reliving it. Many people unknowingly carry old experiences as though they're still unfolding. But it's not unfolding, but they think it is. They feel that it is and are reacting as if it is. The body will tense. The breath will begin to be shortened. The mind is preparing itself for danger. Not because danger is present, but because an old wound has been awakened. And the body will remember what the conscious mind believes it has already left behind. These are those things, the scars from the past, that is what causes someone to just react in anger and blow up, overreact. It's the same that causes someone to have an anxiety attack, or it's that same that causes somebody to be triggered into a bout of depression. See, all of these things, the anger, the anxiety, the depression, those are all manifestations of the scars from the past being relived. And through the Frith model, we can learn how to bring healing to all those things. So therefore, we don't have anger issues. We don't have anxiety. We don't have depression. Now, that's not saying that we'll never feel those things. We'll still feel the anger. We'll still feel anxiety, feel depression, but it's not going to become overwhelming to where it becomes that dark cloud that is uncontrollable. We'll feel it. We can recognize it, acknowledge it, and then we can deal with it before any reaction comes. And this is why we approach painful memories with discipline rather than avoidance. Avoidance leaves the burden untouched. Endless reliving keeps it alive. In the Frith model calls us to a third path. We acknowledge what happened, but we remain anchored in the present. We refuse to surrender today's judgment to yesterday's pain. And this requires us to hold two truths as one. The past was real, and it's not happening now. And that distinction restores freedom. And as we learn to remain present, emotions often begin to surface. Grief, fear, anger, shame, regret. Regret is a big one. Many people mistake this for failure, but it's not failure. It's movement. An old wound cannot be restored while it remains hidden beneath layers of silence and avoidance. What is brought honestly into the light can finally be understood. And this doesn't mean surrendering ourselves to every emotion that arises. The goal is neither suppression nor indulgence, okay? But it's stewardship. Emotions are meant to be experienced, but they're also meant to be examined and ordered. They're meant to inform our judgment, not to replace our judgment. And this also requires examining the stories that we have built around our experiences. Because events will shape us, but the meanings we assign to those events often shape us even more. Okay, a person experiences rejection, and then they'll conclude, I'm unworthy. Another will experience failure, and then they'll believe, I'll never succeed. Someone else could experience betrayal, and then it's just stuck in their mind that no one can ever be trusted. Now, the event that from the past that caused all of this, it was real. But the conclusion drawn from it may not be real. It may not be correct. And part of the house clearing is separating facts from interpretations. And so we ask, what actually happened? What meaning did I attach to it? Is that meaning true? Does it still deserve authority over my life? These questions are not asked to erase the past, okay? Because again, the past is real. We don't want to just erase it or deny it. But they're asked in order to prevent false conclusions from governing our future. Because this work demands brutal honesty. And again, I stress this, which is why I return to it. This work demands honesty, but honesty is not self-condemnation. It's not self-hatred. It's taking responsibility and bringing restoration, seeking the right order. We find what's wrong and we remove what no longer belongs. We identify the burdens that we've carried beyond their proper season. We loosen the grip of old fears. We expose the hidden beliefs beneath our reactions. We clear the rooms of the inner household so they may once again become places of strength rather than, places of captivity. We don't need to be like the ex-con who still lives his or her life as if they're still in prison. No, they were in prison and they're out. Now's the time to live like it. Be free in your mind and in your heart and in your soul. Don't let that prison live rent free and in your heart and in your mind and control you, because you may have been that ex-con before, but you're no longer. So it's learning how to stop acting like it. So we're talking about this house clearing, right? But an empty house is not yet a restored house. Removing the disorder, it creates space, if you will. And the next task is deciding, well, what's going to fill that space? Because, lasting restoration requires more than removing what's false. It requires building what is true. And that is the work of what I call the reforging. So the awakening teaches us to see. And the house clearing teaches us to remove what has fallen into disorder. But neither of these will complete the work, right? A house emptied of decay is not a home. Once the old burdens have been identified and the weakened foundations exposed, we must begin building something worthy to stand in their place. And this is the reforging. Now, reforging is not the creation of a new self, okay? But it's the restoration of the one that has been obscured by disorder, okay? The Frith model doesn't change your orlog because that can't be changed, Fate is what it is. It's going to happen. It's going to build. It's going to do. But it teaches you to answer your unfolding weird with wisdom and discipline and honor. Because the goal is not to try to escape who you were born to be, because you can escape that. But it's to faithfully become the person that you were meant to become. Just as a smith doesn't create a blade just by wishing for one, character is formed by intention. Iron must pass through fire. It must be shaped with purpose, tested, refined, and strengthened through repeated labor. And so too must we. The work of reforging begins with a simple recognition. Every person lives according to a set of beliefs, right? Some beliefs are deliberate. Others have never been questioned, and they exist quietly beneath awareness, shaping how we interpret the world, how we respond to hardship, and what we expect from ourselves and others. These beliefs become the unseen framework of the soul. And many of them first appeared during the moments of pain. I'm not enough. I can't trust anyone. I always fail. The world's against me. Some such beliefs, they often begin as attempts to explain the difficult experiences, okay? But what once served as protection then slowly becomes identity. And the Frith model asks us to bring these hidden foundations into the light, not to condemn them, but to examine them. Because every belief deserves the same questions. Is it true? Does it reflect reality? Does it strengthen my ability to meet life honorably? Or does it keep me imprisoned? Truth must become our highest loyalty. Not familiarity or comfort. Not the stories that we've repeated for years simply because they have become familiar. A house cannot remain standing with a rotten foundation. And likewise, a life cannot remain ordered if its foundation is falsehood. When a belief no longer reflects reality, then it has to be replaced. And not with, comforting illusions, but with something stronger. A person who believes that hardship proves they're weak, he or she will live very differently from one who understands hardship as an opportunity to develop resilience. A person who believes every failure defines them becomes afraid to act. A person who understands failure as instruction continues learning. The circumstance hasn't changed, the interpretation has. And this is why beliefs matter. They're not merely opinions, but they're organizing principles. They answer the silent questions that we ask every day. Who am I? What kind of world do I live in? Can I be trusted? Can others be trusted? What should I expect when life becomes difficult? These answers influence far more than our thoughts. They shape the whole person. The Huger, the thinking and perceiving faculty of the self, our mind, it's constantly interpreting experience. And every interpretation sends instruction throughout the rest of our being. So if the Huger concludes that every uncertainty is danger, then the body will prepare for conflict. The world will become filled with just constant threats. You'll see threats everywhere, even when there are none. If the Huger understands that hardship can be met with preparation, courage, discipline, then the body receives a different set of instruction. It studies, it observes, it prepares without surrendering to fear. And this is why the Frith model rejects the false separation between the mind and body, because beliefs are lived before they are spoken. They become our posture. They become our habits, our expectations, and ultimately they become our character. Eventually they become the lens through which we experience reality itself. But a lens is not reality itself. It is only the way that we are presently viewing reality. And that distinction is essential, because so many people just spend years reacting, not as the world is, but to the world as they have learned to interpret it, if you will. Again, old fears become present dangers, old wounds become present judgments, old survival strategies become permanent ways of living. And this is what creates the survival trap. Now, the survival system it exists to preserve life, right? And it teaches us to recognize danger, to respond quickly, and to endure hardship. Without it, no people could have survived, right? Yet every gift loses its proper purpose when it exceeds its proper boundaries. Remember what I said about the shield? A shield belongs in battle, but that doesn't mean we carry it around, because then it just becomes a big weight that we're carrying around. And there's no reason to be carrying that weight around when we're not in battle. When survival becomes our constant way of seeing the world, then we start seeing everything as a potential threat. We don't have wisdom, but we have fear. We don't have purpose. We just have the constant need for protection. And we're not making informed judgments, but we're just merely reacting. We're allowing those unseen things to control us, and we are not even smart enough to know that we're being controlled. That's the scary thing, that you're controlled without even knowing you're controlled. Recognizing that, how does that make you feel? Definitely not good, but in recognizing that, then we can learn, and we can grow, and we can change. Instead of asking what is true, we begin asking what might hurt me. And that's not the voice of wisdom. That's just a remembered danger. The practitioner of Frith must learn to distinguish between the two. Wisdom responds to reality. Survival often responds to memory. Wisdom evaluates. Fear assumes. Wisdom creates options, but fear narrows them. And this is why that observer within remains indispensable throughout the entire Frith model. Because whenever fear arises, we pause and we ask, is this danger present? Or is this just an old pattern speaking? What's the evidence that's before me? What response will best reflect truth and honor and responsibility? These questions restore authority to conscious judgment. But you need to understand that the goal is never to eliminate fear, because fear has its place. A truly scary person is a person who has no fear, because that's not normal and that's not healthy, and that's just something not right about that. Fear does have its place. It's just not there you can't let it control you. It must never occupy that high seat, because only truth deserves that place. And the final labor of the forging is embodiment. And many people mistake understanding for transformation. It's not enough to recognize a better belief. It must become the way we live. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it governs action. A person doesn't become courageous just by admiring courage. They become courageous by choosing honorable action despite the fear. Not the absence of fear, but in despite the fear. A person doesn't become disciplined by appreciating discipline. They become disciplined through repeated practice. The same principle applies to every virtue. And we rehearse it. We speak according to it. We act according to it. We continue until thought, word, and deed begin moving together. And this is the restoration of inner integrity. Our beliefs become visible in our actions. And our actions strengthen our habits. And our habits shape our character. And our character determines the kind of life that we build. And this is the true meaning of reforging. It's not self-invention, it's self-restoration. That the scattered parts of the self are brought back into right relationship. And the past no longer governs the present. Fear no longer governs judgment. Beliefs are tested against reality. Actions are brought into harmony with principles. That inner household becomes ordered once again. And this is Frith. Not the absence of hardship, it's just the presence of right order. And once that foundation has been established, we can begin identifying the enduring laws that sustain it. And those laws are the 9 Frith principles. But before the principles themselves, it's worth remembering where the journey has led us. We have awakened to the patterns governing our lives. We've cleared the house of what no longer belongs there. And then we've begun the work of reforging the character. And the next step is to establish the laws that preserve that work. And these are the 9 Frith principles. They are not abstract theories or inspirational sayings. They're disciplines to be practiced and standards against which we measure ourselves. Together they form the framework of the inner household, the structure that keeps the mind, character, and spirit in right order. Again, we look at it we look at ourselves like a home. Just as a home needs a solid foundation and sturdy beams and continual care, right? And so does the self. Now, without governing principles, disorder inevitably returns. Impulse will override judgment, and fear will replace courage, and unconscious habits quietly reclaim authority. The modern world encourages the opposite of Frith. It rewards distraction. There's constant stimulation in this endless pursuit of external satisfaction, while neglecting the discipline of the inner life. And the Frith model turns our attention inward, because the first household of any person must govern it's themselves. One who cannot govern their own thoughts and emotions and habits and actions, they're going to struggle to govern anything else. And these principles provide the means by which that governance becomes possible. Okay, let's look at number 1. Observation is causal. So, again, everything begins with awareness. What remains hidden continues to influence us without our consent. Habits become automatic. Emotions dictate decisions. And assumptions will quietly shape our lives because they operate beneath conscious attention. And the moment we observe a pattern, however, then our relationship to it changes. We interrupt its automatic authority, and instead of being carried along by instinct or habit, we become capable of choice. And this is the role of the observer within. By witnessing our thoughts and our emotions and our reactions without immediately surrendering to them, we gain the freedom to respond deliberately rather than impulsively. And mastery always begins with clarity, with seeing clearly. So, the second principle, perception shapes experience. So, we never encounter the world as just raw reality alone, right? We encounter it through the lens of memory and in our beliefs, our expectations, the way we interpret it, and these internal filters determine what we notice. It determines what we'll overlook and what meaning that we assign to events. Because again, two people may endure the same hardship yet emerge with entirely different conclusions. One discovers resilience while the other finds defeat. Because the difference will lie less in the circumstance, but more so in the interpretation. So for this reason, the Frith model asks us to examine not only what has happened, but also the story that we have built around it. Because false interpretations can imprison us just as effectively as false beliefs. But truthful interpretation, by contrast, restores clarity and freedom. So number 3, the past lives through unresolved patterns. Experiences that remain unresolved rarely disappear, but instead, they continue shaping present behavior through emotional habits, the learned expectations, and the unconscious reactions. A present disagreement, a present stressor, it might awaken that old wound. Or a minor failure may stir memories of an earlier inadequacy. And then it just compounds and brings that past into the present and just makes everything worse and more negative than what it actually is or should be. Because we often believe that we're responding to today's circumstance, but in reality we're just reacting to yesterday's injury. And recognizing this distinction is essential. House clearing exists because we cannot establish lasting order while unresolved burdens continue directing our thoughts and actions. And we must identify what belongs to the past so that it can no longer govern the present. Healing begins by recognizing where today's reactions truly originate. Okay, number 4, beliefs shape our state. Beliefs are not passive ideas stored in the mind. They influence the entire person. And they affect how we perceive danger and opportunity, how we prepare for hardship, and even how our bodies respond to the world around us. A person convinced that everything is hostile, they remain perpetually on the defensive. And one who believes that hardship can be met with preparation and courage develops a steadiness instead of panic. Every belief functions as an internal instruction. And over time, those instructions shape our posture and our emotions and our expectations and our conduct. And this is why the work of reforging demands careful examination of the beliefs that we carry. And we must ask whether they're true, whether they serve right order, and whether they produce the character that we seek to cultivate. Beliefs worthy of governing our lives become the very foundation of enduring strength. Number 5, fear contracts, clarity strengthens. So, fear serves an important purpose. Properly ordered, it warns us of genuine danger and prepares us to act wisely. But left unchecked, however, fear can become a tyrant. Okay? It narrows our vision and it magnifies the imagined threats, and it consumes energy that ought to be directed toward meaningful action. And we begin fighting battles that exist only within our own expectations, while neglecting those that actually stand before us. And clarity restores proportion. It allows us to distinguish genuine danger from unnecessary anxiety, and to direct our strength toward what truly deserves our attention. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act according to the clear judgment, despite the fear. The person who possesses clarity, they don't face fewer hardships. They just simply meet them with greater, steadiness. Number 6, patterns lose their power when revealed. So, every repeated behavior follows a recognizable structure. There's a trigger, an emotional response follows. A belief interprets the experience. An action completes the cycle. And when these patterns remain invisible, then they repeat themselves almost automatically. Once they're recognized, however, they become available for examination and correction. And this is where responsibility begins. We cannot change what we refuse to acknowledge. Honest examination exposes the mechanisms that once governed us unconsciously, and it allows us to replace them with better habits. Awareness transforms repetition into deliberate choice. Number 7, meaning determines direction. Okay, events alone do not determine our future. This is within the context of the psychology of what we've been dealing with. Okay, but the meaning that we assign to them often does, right? And so failure can become evidence of worthlessness, or it can become instruction. Rejection can become proof that we are unwanted, or it can become an opportunity to grow in discernment. Hardship can become surrender, or it can become preparation. The Frith model rejects comforting falsehoods. Reforging is not about inventing pleasant stories, okay? But it's about replacing distorted interpretations with truthful ones. Because truth gives suffering its proper place without allowing that suffering to define our identity. The story that we repeatedly tell ourselves eventually becomes the direction in which we live our lives. It becomes the direction in which our lives move and take shape. And by bringing that story into harmony with reality, we reshape the course of our character. 8. Alignment restores Frith. So, Frith exists where there's right order. Now, the inner conflict arises whenever thought, belief, speech, and action move in different directions. We profess one value but yet practice another. We seek peace while we're nurturing disorder. We desire integrity while compromising conviction. Such division weakens our character, and it just weakens our judgment. But alignment restores wholeness by bringing every part of the self into agreement. And what we believe becomes what we speak. And what we speak becomes what we practice. And what we practice becomes who we are. And this harmony is the restoration of Frith with the individual. It is the condition in which integrity replaces contradiction and purpose replaces confusion. Number 9, transformation is always possible. You see, no person is condemned to remain as they are. Human beings possess the capacity to learn, to adapt, and to reshape their character throughout life. Habits can be replaced. Judgments can mature. Discipline can overcome impulse. The patterns that once governed us, they don't need to govern us forever, okay? And this is the heart of reforging. Now, while we can't change the past, we do remain responsible for the person that we're becoming. We are our deeds. And transformation is not achieved through sudden inspiration, but through consistent practice. Repeated actions become habits, and habits become character, and character shapes our walk with Weird as it's unfolding. Growth is neither accidental nor effortless. It is the result of faithful discipline sustained over time. And taken together, these 9 Frith principles, they're more than teachings. But I really believe that they're practical instruments for governing our inner household, our inner self, bringing order within our very being. And practice consistently, they cultivate individuals who are less governed by fear, less vulnerable to distraction, and more capable of meeting hardship with wisdom and resolve. The goal is not perfection. Perfection is not attainable. But the goal is alignment, bringing awareness, belief, speech, and action into the right order so that Frith may be restored within the self. When the inner household is governed well, we become capable of extending that same order beyond ourselves to our families, our communities, and ultimately to the world around us. We have observation, reorientation, and integration. The 9 Frith principles describe the laws that govern inner order. The Frith process describes how those laws are put into practice. And principles without application, they just remain ideas. But the Frith process transforms them into disciplined action. It is a continual cycle rather than just a single event. And throughout life, we encounter new circumstances, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. Each experience invites us to return to this process, refining our character with greater wisdom and intention. The process unfolds in 3 stages. What I just said a minute ago: observation, reorientation, and integration. Each stage builds upon the one before it, and together they form the practical engine of the Frith model. Okay, so let's go through the observation, reorientation, and integration. Observation is the deliberate practice of honestly evaluating your thoughts and emotions and beliefs without self-condemnation, without that self-hatred. But by stepping back to witness these impulses with calm attention, when you can do that, you interrupt the automatic reactions and you reclaim control of your mind. And this mindful awareness transforms unconscious living into deliberate action, which makes genuine, wise choices possible. And then reorientation involves evaluating the recognized patterns and consciously redirecting them toward wisdom and truth and right order. And it demands accepting difficult realities over comforting illusions to ensure that actions arise from deliberate judgment rather than just emotional reflexes. It's through these consistent, truthful decisions that your inner household becomes increasingly ordered and structured over time. And then integration, that's the steady practice of transforming wise decisions into enduring habits through repeated choices. As you consistently practice discipline and courage, these actions cease to require great effort, and they naturally become an unbreakable part of your character. And ultimately, this gradual reinforcement turns abstract principles into a lived reality that dictates the honorable direction of your life. Now, these three stages, they're not completed just once and then forgotten. Life continually presents new experiences that reveal deeper patterns requiring attention. Each challenge becomes another opportunity to observe more clearly, reorient more faithfully, and integrate more completely. And the process repeats, not because previous efforts failed, but because growth itself is continuous. With each cycle, awareness becomes sharper, judgment becomes steadier, and character becomes stronger, and that inner household becomes more firmly established. And this is why the Frith model should never be understood as a program that has a final graduation, because it's a lifelong discipline of mastering the self, a lifelong discipline of self-governance. As long as we live, there will always be opportunities to refine thought and strengthen virtue and bring our lives into greater alignment with truth. The Frith process is the practical expression of everything that we have explored thus far. Awakening teaches us to see. House clearing teaches us to remove what doesn't belong. Reforging teaches us to build anew. The 9 Frith principles establish the laws that sustain that work, and the Frith process places those laws into daily practice. Observation cultivates awareness, reorientation restores right direction, and integration establishes lasting character. And together they form a continuous rhythm of growth through which the individual becomes increasingly ordered and increasingly disciplined and increasingly capable of living in Frith. And this is, again, it's not about perfection, because we're not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes always, forever. But that's okay, because that's how you learn. It's the lifelong pursuit of right order. Frith is not a destination reached once and then you have it, you're good. But it's something that's continually maintained through conscious awareness and faithful practice. And when this process becomes the pattern for our lives, that inner household stands firm regardless of the storms that's pounding upon the walls. But the Frith model, it's not intended to produce a temporary change in behavior. It's all about cultivating a way of life. Many people will pursue transformation as if it's a destination, as if it's a goal that you attain, and then you're like, yes, I got there. They imagine that after enough learning or enough effort, they'll eventually arrive at a point where they don't need to grow anymore. But life doesn't work that way. Every season brings new responsibilities and new relationships and new hardships and new opportunities to mature. There's always more that we could do, and that's why I like to say, never settle for mediocrity, but remember, effort is worth more than results. And for this reason, Frith is not something we achieve once, but we continually maintain it. Continually tend the garden, if you will. Because a home is not going to remain clean just because you cleaned it one time. The dust is going to gather. Various things will be moved out of its place. There's going to be repairs. Because the work is never truly finished, because life itself is ongoing. And that inner household, our inner selves follow that same law. Our thoughts will drift. Old habits attempt to return, even if you think they're gone. New challenges expose weaknesses that we have not even recognized yet. But none of this means that we failed. It just simply reminds us that self-governance is a continual responsibility, and it's not a single accomplishment. And this understanding, though, it frees us from two common errors. The first error is complacency. Progress, it can create the illusion that our work is complete. We can become confident in yesterday's discipline while neglecting today's responsibilities. But character, however, is not preserved by memory, but by practice. And every day presents a new opportunity either to strengthen right order or to permit disorder to return. Now, the second error is discouragement. Many people become disheartened when they discover that the old patterns resurfacing or that new weaknesses are emerging. They make that determination that their previous efforts accomplished nothing. But the Frith model teaches us otherwise. Growth is not measured by the absence of struggle, but by the manner in how we respond to it. And that really is the how we should handle, fate. It's something's going to happen, and whether we like it or not, that something is going to happen. But how we respond to it, that makes all the difference in the world. That's where our choice comes in. And the disciplined person is not one who never falls into disorder, but one who recognizes disorder quickly and works to restore right order in a faithful and diligent way, and learns from every experience. Progress is found in increasing the awareness and building sounder judgment and acquiring greater consistency over time. And this is why the Frith process is cyclical rather than linear, because observation continues throughout life because there's always more to understand, and reorientation continues because every stage of life presents new decisions that require wisdom. And integration continues because character is forged through repetition over many years, not through isolated moments of inspiration. Each cycle deepens the one that came before it. Awareness becomes sharper, judgment becomes steadier, and discipline becomes more, natural. What once demanded conscious effort, it gradually becomes part of one's character. And in this way, Frith is cultivated rather than achieved. And the measure of this cultivation is alignment. Alignment exists when our thoughts, beliefs, words, and actions move together toward the same end. We no longer profess one set of values while living according to another. Our convictions guide our decisions, and our decisions reinforce our convictions. And such integrity creates stability. A divided person they're easily pulled in this direction and that direction. Like a ship on waves and has no sail. It's just going to be tossed to and fro, right? Because different parts of the self seek different ends. But an aligned person, they possess an inner coherence that allows them to remain steadfast even amid uncertainty. An aligned person has the sail, has the rudder, can steer into the wind against the waves and still go in the right direction. But this steadiness is not, rigidity. Alignment does not prevent learning or correction or adaptation. On the contrary, it makes them possible, because the individual is anchored in truth rather than pride, and they can acknowledge mistakes without losing their identity, and they can revise false beliefs without fearing the collapse of their character. They remain rooted while continuing to grow. And this balance between stability and adaptability is essential. A tree survives the storm, definitely not because it refuses to move, but because its roots hold firmly while its branches yield where necessary. And just like skyscrapers, they're built to sway with the wind, and they have stabilizers that are part of their structure. And likewise, a well-ordered person remains grounded in enduring principles while responding wisely to the changing circumstances. In other words, they are inflexible. They are flexible, and the same pattern extends beyond the individual. A person who governs themselves brings greater order to their family, and ordered families will then strengthen their communities, and healthy communities will preserve the culture that sustains them. And thus the work of Frith is never merely personal. Every act of self-governance contributes to the well-being of those that are entrusted to our care. And this is why the Frith model begins with the individual, but it never ends there. Just like the concentric circles of loyalty. Go back to my book that I wrote a few years ago. It all ties together. It's all building on each other. The restoration of our society, of our folk, begins with the restoration of ourselves individually. And it's not through force of slogans nor by expecting others to change first. We must be the change that we want to see in the world. It begins with individuals who willingly assume responsibility for their own thoughts, actions, and their own character. And from that foundation, right order spreads outward through example and trust and faithful service. And this understanding also guards against perfectionism, because perfection is neither promised nor required. Humans remain finite and imperfect throughout life because it's just how we're designed. And mistakes are going to happen, and judgment is going to fail us sometimes. There'll be seasons of strength, but there'll also be seasons of hardship. What matters is not flawless performance, but just faithful practice. And each day presents another opportunity to observe honestly, to reorient wisely, and to integrate what has been learned. Because every small act of discipline reinforces the habits from which character is built. Over months and years, these seemingly ordinary choices produce extraordinary results. And the person who consistently governs the inner household becomes increasingly difficult to manipulate through fear or distraction or impulse. But they become dependable under pressure and measured in judgment and steadfast in purpose. Others will come to trust them because their actions reliably reflect their principles. And such a person embodies Frith, not because they've escaped struggle, but because they've learned to meet struggle with order instead of chaos. And this is the lifelong practice to which the Frith model calls us. Again, I'll reiterate, it's not a program to complete or a philosophy to admire, but it's a discipline to be lived and renewed daily through conscious awareness and right and consistent action. For as long as life continues, the work of maintaining the inner household continues with it. And in that faithful work, Frith endures. But now, I'm going to conclude things. Just try to wrap things up here. The Frith model is not an end to itself. It's a beginning. And everything that we've explored in this episode, from awakening to house clearing to reforging the 9 Frith principles to the daily disciplines of observation, reorientation, and integration, they all exist for one purpose, and that's to help us live with greater honor and greater clarity and greater responsibility. Because knowledge alone can't accomplish this. understanding is only the first step, and wisdom is revealed through its practice. Because every day is another opportunity to observe ourselves honestly and to restore what has fallen into disorder and to choose actions that reflect the person that we're striving to become. This is not a journey toward perfection, because perfection belongs to no human being. But it's a lifelong discipline of continual refinement, of returning again and again to right order whenever life, hardship, or our own shortcomings lead us astray. It's following that Wodinic path of always seeking and always striving. Our ancestors understood this well. They didn't expect a life free from struggle. They expected storms, loss, uncertainty, hardship. What matters was not whether those trials came, but whether they possessed the character and discipline and courage to meet them well. The Frith model seeks to recover the same spirit, that ancestral spirit. And it reminds us that the true strength is not found in domination. It's not found in comfort or in the absence of difficulty, but it's found in governing ourselves before attempting to govern anything else. And it's found in bringing our thoughts and our beliefs and our emotions and our actions into harmony. And it's found in becoming people who can be trusted, people who can be trusted with responsibility and with truth and with the well-being of those around us. Because Frith begins within. An ordered household begins with an ordered heart. An ordered community begins with ordered households. And an enduring people are sustained by men and women who willingly undertake the lifelong work of self-mastery. That is the invitation that's before us. Not merely just to admire these ideas or just to agree with them, but to live them, to tend that inner hearth with the same care that our ancestors gave to the hearths of their homes, to strengthen what is weak, to preserve what is good, to restore what has fallen into disorder, and to leave behind something stronger than what we ourselves inherited. Okay, you now have the framework. You have the principles. You have the path. I've laid it out there for you. The rest depends upon what you choose to do with it. Because Frith is not something that we just find, but it's something that we cultivate. One thought, one choice, one disciplined act at a time. But anyway, with that, we'll conclude this episode. So I thank you for joining me. Much appreciation. Our task is simple. Meet life with courage and honor and good intentions. And remember, Weird Bithful Arad Swag Gath Ahio Swak Hio Sha. Fate is fully fixed, and she goes ever as she shall. So until next time, stay strong, stay true, and hold fast to your faith, your kin, and your folk. Hail the gods, hail the folk, and hail our ancestors, and hail the Frithstead. And with that, I'll leave you with this advice. Know the gods, follow the law, and perform bloat. Live the faith, hold the line. Now go and do. Hail the doers. And with that, I'll see you on the next one. Have a good one.